The world remembers it as the funniest, most lighthearted comedy of the 90s. But the reality is suffocatingly dark. Behind the endless laughter lies a devastating curse that took the lives of comedy legends Bernie Mac, Tiny Lister, A.J. Johnson, and the beloved John Witherspoon. But the tragedy didn't just claim the dead. For the living, the nightmare was just beginning, as actress Angela Means suffered years of severe psychological harassment simply because her iconic line became a degrading global meme. But the eerie string of tragic, premature deaths and the real-life trauma inflicted upon the cast wasn't the only dark cloud hovering over this legendary comedy franchise. The surviving cast members were locked in a bitter, silent war for years, leading to a devastating late-night phone call that almost buried this cinematic legacy forever. It was exactly 2 in the morning when the phone violently rang in the pitch black, delivering the soul-crushing news to Ice Cube that everything they had relentlessly worked for was officially canceled. This single, brutal phone call seemingly ended his exhausting, 2-decade-long legal and creative battle with the corporate studio executives who held his intellectual property hostage. For 20 years, loyal fans around the globe had desperately begged for a final chapter, completely unaware of the toxic, unspoken feuds that were actually tearing the production apart from the inside out. Behind the glittering facade of the funniest, most culturally impactful movie in modern hip-hop history lies a treacherous trail of broken promises, massive egos, and shattered brotherhoods. The public was deliberately sold a very specific, carefully sanitized narrative about why the iconic dynamic duo broke up at the absolute height of their global fame. People were led to believe it was just a natural parting of ways or a peaceful creative difference, but the truth is far more sinister and deeply rooted in Hollywood greed. To truly understand the spectacular collapse of this highly anticipated comedy empire, we have to aggressively expose the massive, $100 million secrets that the studios and actors desperately tried to keep buried. The real, coldly calculated reason why Chris Tucker completely abandoned the franchise is drastically different from the pious, religious public relations narrative that was enthusiastically fed to the mainstream media. Furthermore, the entire existence of this legendary film actually hinged on a bizarre series of near disasters, including a mind-blowing moment where a simple, accidental plate of spaghetti literally saved cinematic history from being rewritten entirely. Everything you thought you knew about this classic film is merely a protective shell hiding a chaotic, cutthroat reality. We are about to violently pull back the curtain on a ruthless Hollywood civil war that destroyed lifelong friendships, sparked incredibly petty subliminal on-screen attacks, and left a painful trail of devastated actors in its wake. The narrative of two friends smoking on a porch was completely overshadowed by the dark, corporate machinery that eventually swallowed them whole. How did one of cinema's greatest comedic duos end up so irreparably fractured and deeply resentful that their final masterpiece was put on ice for decades? To understand the catastrophic downfall and the bitter betrayal that severed this iconic brotherhood, we must first expose the massive, multi-million-dollar lie that tore them apart. When the highly anticipated sequel was finally announced, fans around the world were left completely stunned by a glaring, unforgivable absence. The dynamic, hilarious duo that anchored the entire franchise had been permanently broken up, with Chris Tucker walking away from the exact role that made him a household name. For years, the media and Ice Cube himself pushed a very specific, carefully constructed public relations narrative to explain the sudden, shocking departure. The story went that Tucker had turned down a staggering $12 million because he had become a devout Christian, completely refusing to curse or pretend to smoke weed on camera ever again. It was a noble, deeply personal excuse that the public readily swallowed, perfectly protecting the pristine image of a rapidly rising Hollywood star. But the late, great John Witherspoon eventually shattered that wholesome illusion with a dose of brutal, unadulterated honesty that nobody else in the industry was willing to say out loud. The underlying truth was that Tucker didn't just casually find religion and walk away from a $12 million payday out of sheer, uncompromising moral conviction. He had quietly secured a monumental, life-changing opportunity that made the comedy sequel's massive budget look like absolute pocket change. The cold, calculated reality was that Chris Tucker had been offered an astronomical $20 million, plus a lucrative percentage of the massive box office profits, to star opposite Jackie Chan in the blockbuster Rush Hour franchise. From a purely business perspective, it was a ruthless, genius maneuver to abandon a cult classic hood comedy for a guaranteed, golden ticket to international superstardom. The religious awakening might have been a genuine personal shift, but the colossal mountain of cash waiting for him in the action genre was the ultimate deciding factor. But chasing a massive Hollywood paycheck wasn't the only fatal blow to their relationship, as a much darker, ego-driven war was secretly brewing over who actually owned the soul of the movie. While the media obsessed over the money and the religious awakening, a deeply toxic, unspoken feud was quietly poisoning the once unbreakable brotherhood between Ice Cube and Chris Tucker. The core of this bitter, silent conflict boiled down to a single, explosive question that has plagued the entertainment industry for decades: who truly deserves the ultimate credit for a cinematic masterpiece? On one side, Ice Cube fiercely protected his intellectual property, proudly asserting that he and DJ Pooh wrote the script, built the characters, and constructed the entire universe from absolute scratch. He firmly believed that without his foundational vision and relentless grinding hustle, the beloved character of Smokey would have never even existed. However, Chris Tucker harbored a deep, festering resentment, feeling entirely disrespected and creatively marginalized by Ice Cube's firm claims of sole cinematic ownership. Tucker knew that the written script only provided a basic framework, and that the absolute most legendary, culturally defining moments of the film were never actually typed out on paper. Iconic, unforgettable catchphrases like "You got knocked the fout" and his wild, erratic physical comedy were entirely improvised, spontaneous explosions of his own raw, unfiltered comedic genius. Tucker felt he had taken a solid script and single-handedly elevated it into a timeless cultural phenomenon, yet he felt he was being treated like just another replaceable hired actor. This silent, heavily guarded resentment finally erupted into the public eye in the most petty, passive-aggressive way imaginable. When Ice Cube ultimately released the sequel without Tucker, he deliberately weaponized the opening scene of the film to take a vicious, subliminal shot at his former co-star. The dialogue heavily implied that there were greedy, delusional individuals out there desperately trying to steal credit for writing his original script. A blatant, unmistakable jab aimed directly at Tucker's improvisational claims. This bitter, ego-fueled war over creative ownership officially killed their friendship, leaving a permanent, ugly scar on the franchise. How did a movie that sparked such a toxic, ego-driven war even get greenlit in the first place? The truth is, Hollywood never wanted this film, and its very creation was considered absolute career suicide. To understand how this monumental project even got off the ground, we have to rewind the clock back to the early 90s, when Ice Cube wasn't a beloved, family-friendly movie star. At the time, he was the furious, unapologetic, hardcore gangster rapper of NWA, dropping highly controversial, politically charged albums that terrified mainstream America. So when he suddenly announced his grand plan to step away from the microphone to write and produce a lighthearted comedy, his own inner circle genuinely thought he had lost his mind. His management and crew looked at him like he was throwing his entire musical legacy away, aggressively warning him that this bizarre cinematic pivot was absolute, undeniable career suicide. But this risky, unprecedented career move wasn't born out of a simple desire to make people laugh. It was fueled by a deep, burning rage toward Hollywood's blatant hypocrisy. Every single movie depicting South Central Los Angeles, including highly acclaimed films Cube himself had starred in, painted the exact same bleak, deeply depressing picture. The mainstream media relentlessly portrayed his neighborhood as a deadly, blood-soaked war zone where absolutely nothing existed except brutal gang violence, rampant drug abuse, and inescapable despair. Cube was desperately determined to prove to the world that the hood also had vibrant, beautiful moments, and that people living in poverty still experienced genuinely good, hilarious days. Turning that righteous anger into a cinematic reality, however, proved to be a grueling, humiliating nightmare that almost never saw the light of day. The major Hollywood studios completely rejected the concept, forcing Ice Cube and DJ Pooh to construct a budget so pathetically low it bordered on absolute absurdity. They were so desperate to get this authentic story on screen that they legitimately sat down and planned to fund the entire production by maxing out their own personal credit cards. They even seriously considered shooting the entire movie in gritty, cheap black and white just to cut lighting costs, a desperate move that would have completely altered the vibrant cultural aesthetic of the final film. Securing this shoestring budget was a miracle in itself, but the behind-the-scenes casting process was so brutal it almost erased the legendary character of Smokey from existence. The character of Smokey is widely considered the pulsing, erratic heartbeat of the entire franchise. But the original plan for the role involved a heartbreaking, massive injustice. Co-writer DJ Pooh had poured his actual soul into the script, writing the character based entirely on his own real-life neighborhood experiences and teenage weed-dealing escapades. He knew the precise rhythm, the authentic street slang, and the unique physical mannerisms of the character because he was literally writing an exaggerated, comedic version of himself. Yet the ruthless studio executives coldly ripped the role right out of his hands, bluntly telling the creator of the character that he simply wasn't famous enough to carry a major theatrical release. Forced to painfully swallow his pride, Pooh stepped aside, opening the door for a young, relatively unknown stand-up comedian named Chris Tucker to step into the massive spotlight. But Tucker's journey to becoming a cinematic legend began with a massive, humiliating stumble that almost cost him his entire Hollywood career before it even started. He arrived at his initial audition completely exhausted from the grueling stand-up comedy circuit, wildly unfocused, and clearly unprepared to read the heavy, fast-paced dialogue. His first attempt at bringing the character to life was so painfully bland and disjointed that the casting directors instantly wrote him off, declaring the highly anticipated audition an absolute unmitigated disaster. Tucker was on the verge of being permanently tossed into the Hollywood rejection pile, an outcome that would have fundamentally changed the trajectory of comedy history forever. But in a bizarre twist of fate, the actress cast to play Felicia, Angela Means, noticed his desperate struggle and made a completely unselfish, historic intervention. She invited the terrified, overwhelmed comedian to her house for a simple, home-cooked spaghetti dinner, spending the entire exhausting night breaking down the script and relentlessly coaching him on the character's core rhythm. By the time that plate of spaghetti was finished, Tucker had undergone a complete psychological transformation, walking into his second audition and delivering a mind-blowing performance that instantly secured the role. Thanks to that life-saving plate of spaghetti, Tucker secured the role, but stepping onto the actual set would immediately plunge him and the rest of the cast into a pressure cooker of stress, strict rules, and genuine anger. For decades, audiences have watched these characters effortlessly float through a hazy, weed-filled comedic masterpiece, assuming the actors were genuinely partying on set. In reality, the environment behind the camera was a suffocating pressure cooker where absolutely no one was allowed to smoke real marijuana. Ice Cube made a firm, non-negotiable decision to stay 100% sober during the entire production, operating under a terrifying level of daily anxiety. He was a first-time producer working with a microscopic budget of less than $3 million, given a seemingly impossible window of just 20 days to capture the entire film. There was absolutely zero room for expensive reshoots, meaning every single take had to be ruthlessly efficient and perfectly executed. The financial constraints were so painfully tight that the main stars were paid a pitiful $5,000 each, a staggering reality for a movie that would soon generate hundreds of millions. This high-stress, low-budget environment bred an intense atmosphere on set, where genuine annoyance frequently bled directly into the comedic performances. In fact, this exact behind-the-scenes tension is precisely what birthed the most legendary, culturally defining meme in modern internet history. The script originally called for the character Felicia to simply walk up to the porch, ask for a handout, get rejected, and walk away. But actress Angela Means decided to take a massive creative risk, intentionally breaking the script by aggressively squeezing herself right between Ice Cube and Chris Tucker without warning them. If you watch the scene closely, you can see Tucker's eyes widen with genuine irritation as he is visibly annoyed by her sudden invasion of his personal space. His highly irritated, unscripted reaction and Ice Cube's famously dismissive line were not acting. They were real expressions of frustration from two stressed-out actors dealing with an unpredictable co-star. All of this intense pressure, real frustration, and unscripted brilliance accidentally created a timeless cultural masterpiece, which brings us back to the present day, where after decades of tragedy, feuds, and legal wars, an impossible miracle has finally happened. For over 20 agonizing years, Ice Cube fought a relentless, exhausting legal war against Warner Brothers to win back the rights to his own creation. The studio giants held the franchise hostage, refusing to let the original creator finish the story on his own terms while the cast continued to age and tragically pass away. It was a classic, seemingly unwinnable battle of David versus Goliath, an artist desperately fighting a faceless corporation for the basic right to own his intellectual property. But in a shocking turn of events that no one saw coming, new leadership finally relented, and a cinematic miracle was officially greenlit. After decades of bitter feuds, broken promises, and public animosity, it was finally announced that the highly anticipated final chapter was in production. Even more miraculously, the deep wounds between the original duo seem to have healed, with Chris Tucker finally expected to reprise the legendary role of Smokey after walking away 30 years ago. But while this long-awaited reunion should be a moment of pure, unadulterated celebration, it is permanently shadowed by a devastating sense of profound loss. The heavy doors of the neighborhood will open one last time, but the emotional weight of the empty chairs left behind by the deceased comedy legends will be impossible to ignore. From a furious gangster rapper's crazy idea, through a bitter Hollywood civil war and heartbreaking tragedy, this franchise has survived against all impossible odds. It serves as a powerful, enduring reminder that sometimes the greatest, most impactful stories ever told are the exact ones the world insists you aren't allowed to tell. After 30 years of chaos, can the return of Smokey actually resurrect the soul of this franchise? Or are those empty chairs just too heavy of a loss? And what do you really think about Chris Tucker's original religious excuse for leaving the cast? Drop your wildest theories and honest opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss Hollywood's darkest, most heavily guarded secrets.